It's time for another comparison of compact SUVs, and this time we're doing petrol manuals. I'll keep the introductions brief. The last time we did petrol manual compact SUVs, we didn't have these two, the Venue and the XUV 300. But now we do, and so we've brought along the two originals, the Nexon and the EcoSport. Let's get right into it and try and pick a winner. But first, a bit of housekeeping. There's obviously no Vitara Brezza here because at the time of doing this test, there is no petrol engine. Yet. And instead of Ford's 1-litre EcoBoost turbo engine, we chose the newer 1.5 naturally aspirated engine because frankly, it's the better engine overall. And the EcoBoost is set to be discontinued when BS6 norms come into effect in April 2020. And since this test is all about the petrol manual powertrains, let's get right into the numbers. Starting with everyone's favourite, fuel economy. We haven't had a chance to put all these cars through the Autocar fuel efficiency test cycle yet, but going by their ARAI ratings, the Venue comes out on top with 18.27 kpl overall. Okay, now on to more fun stuff. The Venue's 1-litre turbo petrol engine makes 120 horsepower and 172 Nm of torque, which is a nice healthy amount for a car in this class. The XUV 300 with 110 horsepower might not have quite as much power as the Venue, but its 1.2-litre turbo petrol has a class-leading 200 Nm of torque. The Nexon doesn't do too badly either, its 1.2 turbo petrol making 110 horsepower and 170 Nm. But it's the EcoSport that is the anomaly in this bunch, being the only one without a turbo. Still, this 1.5-litre 3-cylinder engine makes the most power at 123 horsepower, and its 150 Nm of torque is not too shabby either. Put up against our testing equipment, the Ford is actually the second quickest car here, hitting the ton in 12.10 seconds. In a hard acceleration run, the Nexon is the first to get to 60 kph, but by the time 100 kph comes around, it's dropped to third place at 12.3 seconds. Surprisingly, despite all that torque, the XUV 300 is the slowest from 0 to 100 kph at 12.8 seconds. It's likely down to this car's hefty 1360 kg curb weight and also to the noticeable turbo lag. The quickest car from 0 to 100 kph is the Hyundai Venue, which gets there in just 11.24 seconds, and in-gear times are only slightly behind the XUV 300. And that's a surprise because in practice, the Venue doesn't feel especially quick. Now, despite having such healthy numbers from what is quite a small capacity engine, this engine doesn't really feel too highly strung, and that's a very good thing for everyday drivability. Okay, it doesn't have a really strong whack low down, nor does it suddenly wake up in the mid-range, but what it has instead is a nice gentle progressive power delivery, and that's exactly what you want for everyday driving. Like most turbo engines, it has a nice strong mid-range, but again, that comes in quite gently. You don't feel that sudden kick. So yes, you get a quick car that feels relaxing to drive too, and the ease of use doesn't stop there. You can hear a little bit of a thrum from the engine, but overall it's a pretty reasonably refined motor. What you like more though is, as with most Hyundais, the gear shift action and the clutch are both very light, which makes light work of driving in traffic. The Tata Nexon 6-speed manual too gives you an encouraging click when you slot gears in, but the rest of the powertrain has its flaws. The Nexon's 1.2-litre turbo petrol engine has middle-of-the-road numbers as well when it comes to power and torque, with 110 horsepower and 117 Nm of torque. And on the whole, it has a decent spread of power delivered quite strongly in the mid-range. It's also the only car here with 3 driving modes for the engine: Eco, City and Sport. And though the differences between the 3 modes aren't like night and day, they are noticeable. Now, while it is a decent enough powertrain and it does have a good amount of punch, it has one severe flaw, and that is hesitation and jerkiness at just about all engine speeds. Once you get it past 2000 RPM and stay on part throttle, it's not that bad and you can make smooth enough progress. However, the moment you lift off, it does sort of jerk and nod your head back. The real problem arises when you drop below 2000 RPM, and that's how you'll be driving in traffic or in the city. It's over here that power delivery is seriously inconsistent and you'll find the car hiccuping back and forth as you move along. You really have to learn to drive around that, and that can be quite annoying. Refinement is also not the best, and you're constantly accompanied by a bit of a grumble from under the bonnet. Refinement is actually a strong point of the other Indian brand car in this test, the Mahindra XUV 300, and the loudest sound you'll hear is a whistle from the turbocharger. But that's not what makes the biggest impression. Oh no! Despite it being the slowest from a standstill, in the real world, this engine is an absolute bomb. It may not have the class-leading power figure, but it does have the class-leading torque figure of 200 Newton meters. It comes in really low, so as soon as you tap your foot down in any gear, this thing just absolutely zips. In fact, it's unexpectedly quick. You have to sort of recalibrate your senses to initially get used to driving this in traffic. And find yourself an open stretch of road, and oh boy! The clutch and the gear shift too are very light, but the only sort of fly in the ointment here is that the gear throws are quite long, a little bit shorter, and it would have been immense fun to drive. Luckily, you won't find yourself shifting too much because even though there is noticeable turbo lag, the XUV 300 doesn't feel completely dead off boost. And that brings us on to the EcoSport. Can a naturally aspirated engine still cut it in a world of turbos? Now yes, this is the facelifted version of the Ford EcoSport, but in terms of model generations, this is the oldest car here, and therefore it's also the most familiar. But don't be put off by the lack of a turbocharger because this is actually a very good engine. It's got enough pep low down and it's got a pretty strong mid-range as well. And at no point does it ever feel like this engine is not enough for the EcoSport. So an enthusiast might miss that energetic hit of power that you get in the mid-range from a turbocharged engine, be it from any of those rivals or even from this car's own EcoBoost engine. But it makes up for that by being far more predictable. You always know what the engine's going to do at any revs, and you can control and modulate the throttle a lot more than you can do in a turbo engine. What really spoils the package though is this 5-speed gearbox. That's right, it's the only 5-speeder amongst all the rivals which get 6-speeders, and it's really firm and rubbery, making it very hard to slot when you're driving in a hurry. But an area where Fords have always shone is in the handling, and I'm happy to report that this EcoSport does not disappoint. You may feel like you're sitting high up in this compact SUV, but it handles like a hatchback. It's really quick and eager to change direction, and when it does, the body doesn't roll around at all. It's a really close match between this and the Nexon when it comes to handling, and frankly we're splitting hairs here because they're both very enjoyable to drive around corners. Ultimately, I think it's the EcoSport that feels the sharpest. Body control is superb too, but that does come at a slight penalty to the ride. This one feels just a tad too firm, even though it's riding on these 16-inch wheels rather than the 17s that you would get on the S spec. The Nexon, meanwhile, has a more forgiving ride, without compromising on the dynamics too much. The steering feels nice and sharp, and it's a closely fought battle between this and the EcoSport in that department. It's also allied to a superbly calibrated suspension that manages to maintain really good body control around corners. And the good bit is that the ride hasn't been compromised in the process. It's really good at soaking up even the harshest of bumps, and it lets the Nexon stay rock solid at high speeds out on the highway. You do get a slight lumpiness at low speeds, but it's a forgivable amount. Step out of the hatchback-like Nexon and into the XUV 300, however, and it's an altogether different animal. So from behind the wheel at least, the Mahindra XUV 300 feels like a much bigger car than it actually is. That's because it's really wide and you can see the bonnet sort of stretch out on either side. The real compactness of this car really happens at the back, and we'll get to that later. And that big car feel extends to the way it rides. Amazingly, this car even rides really well. They've really got the suspension sorted out just right. You might find it a little bit soft in certain occasions, It's just that these 17-inch alloy wheels can get caught out on sharper bumps if you hit them too hard. In the handling department too, it's not that bad. On the suspension front, body control is very good. You don't roll too much in corners. And the steering, well, it's not the best in the test, but it is good enough. And you can dial in some extra weight thanks to the steering modes that are unique to this car. Now while the XUV feels like a big car from behind the wheel, the Venue feels distinctly small. And I know these are all compact SUVs under 4 meters in length, but this one feels the most compact to drive, if you know what I mean. At low to medium speeds, the Venue suspension does a decent job of soaking up the bumps, but as you go a bit faster, you start to notice that it moves you around in the cabin just a little bit. There's a slight firm edge to it, and that's despite the fact it's riding on 16-inch wheels and not the 17s like you find in the XUV 300. Now Hyundai steerings in the past haven't been much to write home about, but this one is a slight improvement. Body control is quite good and you do get a reasonable amount of weight from the steering wheel, but it's just a little bit too slow and a little bit too disconnected to be truly enjoyable. So the Venue might not be the sharpest handler, but it makes up for that by being light and easy to drive. Now yes, driving pleasure is a big part of these petrol manual compact SUVs repertoires, but because these are family cars, space and comfort matter too. The XUV 300 has the most spacious backseat with the greatest width as well as the most legroom. The light colors give it a sense of airiness, and you'll also find a 3-point seatbelt and adjustable headrest for the middle passenger, something the others don't have. What you won't find, however, is an AC vent, and that's a shame. The EcoSport doesn't get a rear AC vent either, and an all-black color scheme lessens the sense of space here. The Ford makes you sit higher up so that it doesn't feel too compromised on space, but ultimately legroom at the rear isn't as good as the Mahindra's. The Nexon has a surprising amount of space for its size despite the seemingly low roof. Clever packaging and a low set seat mean that legroom and headroom come surprisingly close to the Mahindra, although the cabin width and the sculpted bench means it's better for just two. The Venue gets an AC vent too, but it feels the smallest on the inside, and as in the Ford, that's not helped by its all-black color scheme. Although headroom is not too bad, width and legroom are noticeably lower, and squeezing 3 adults in the back here would be quite an ask. You can tell some of this compromise has been made to give it a sensibly sized 350-litre boot, which is about the same as what you get in the Nexon and the EcoSport, although the Hyundai and Tata's luggage areas are much better shaped than the Ford's, which is tall and shallow. This is where the Mahindra takes a huge hit, as its 257-litre boot is almost 100 litres down on the others. The Venue's dashboard is contemporary Hyundai with a smart new steering wheel and an ergonomically friendly dashboard design. The touchscreen is at good height and controls fall easily to hand, and there's plenty of storage around. Quality is really good and it's a close match between it and the XUV 300 on this front. The Mahindra, however, isn't the most cohesive interior design, not just in its look, which is the mishmash of colors and shapes, but also in its functionality, as some controls, especially on the center console, aren't where you'd expect them. Still, it too is practical on the storage front, as is the EcoSport, especially with the revisions that came with the 2017 facelift. The design was heavily updated too, and quality is not bad, but you will find a few hard, scratchy bits, and it's starting to show its age. The Nexon dashboard looks neat and contemporary with some interesting textured plastics that lend a rich feel, but elsewhere you'll find a number of rough edges and flimsy switchgear. Moreover, the door bins are really small, and even the center storage bay is too narrow and deep to be practical. Each of these cars gets the basics right when it comes to equipment, with each having at least one unique feature. For the Nexon, it's those driving modes. However, that aside, the Tata lags behind the others, missing out some important features. The Venue and XUV 300 are the ones that really push the boundaries. The Hyundai gets connected tech via an embedded eSIM, which opens up a number of new ways to interact with your car, and it also gets a wireless mobile phone charger. The Mahindra, on the other hand, gets steering modes, dual zone climate control, heated wing mirrors, and tire pressure monitoring. Ford has revised the EcoSport model range a lot lately, and what's really disappointing is the decision to not offer its brilliant Sync 3 infotainment unit, and with it, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. The Ford still offers 6 airbags though, as does the Venue, and the XUV 300 even offers a 7th. Eliminating any of these is no easy task, as they all have something going for them. The Nexon, as always, plays the price card, with even this top spec version costing just 9.39 lakh rupees. While a tad more expensive, the Ford EcoSport 1.5 Titanium Plus manual at 9.99 lakh rupees is better value, as it gives you a whole lot more. On paper, it seems like you've opted for the lesser of the two petrol engines, but frankly, it doesn't feel that way when you're driving. Well, apart from the gear shift. It's also the best handler of the bunch, with a ride that's not too bad. The XUV 300 is built on superlatives. The most torque, the best refinement, the longest equipment list, and the most spacious cabin. But could that really be worth 11.64 lakh rupees? That's a whole 1 lakh more than the next most expensive car here. And that's when you realize Hyundai has once again pulled off its most famous trick, the one that started with the original Santro. You pay a small premium, which is 10.6 lakh rupees in this case, but it gets you a lot of feel-good factor. That comes in the form of interior design and quality, a long equipment list, and a refined engine. As a bonus, this one also happens to deliver the strongest performance. The compact backseat, which seems like a compromise made to distance it from the Creta, and a ride that can at times feel a bit fidgety, are really the only downsides in an otherwise deftly balanced package. And that's why the Venue wins this test.
It's been less than 3 months since we rode the revolutionary new Harley-Davidson Livewire in America, and we're back here in California to ride another new motorcycle. Now this one is far more conventional, and instead of an electric motor, it runs a good old big V-twin. Say hello to the 2020 Lowrider S. This motorcycle is Harley's newest addition to the Softail family, and its existence is inspired by the latest trends in America's West Coast custom scene. You'll see the effect of that in things like the mini headlamp cowl and the wide handlebar, which sits on top of a 4-inch riser. Most of the Lowrider S is in black, but there are some nicely contrasting chrome touches on the engine fins, the push rods, and the exhaust tips, which nicely offsets the otherwise dark theme. Completing the custom look is a single seat layout, but Harley's accessory catalog will allow you to convert it back to a two-seater if you like. Visually, the rest is very similar to the Lowrider, which includes the fuel tank, dual gauge instruments, and the shape of the rear fender. Under the skin, however, the Lowrider S is more familiar to another bike from the Softail family, the Fat Bob. The reason for this is that the Lowrider S uses the Fat Bob's frame, which brings a 2-degree reduction in the steering rake angle, and it also brings the Fat Bob's UST fork and dual front disc brake setup. The biggest differentiation for this bike from the rest of the Softail family is the design and what Harley-Davidson calls a West Coast style riding position. So how does this feel? Well, let's call it a bit of an acquired taste. To be more precise, this seating position just doesn't feel very natural. The foot pegs remain in the same mid-position layout as a standard lowrider, so your legs aren't stretched out as far as you would imagine on a Harley-Davidson. The handlebar position is vastly different as well, and the tall bar has you stretching forward and wide. In an urban setting, this riding position feels very California cool, and it's understandable why Harley-Davidson calls the Lowrider S the quintessential badass American performance cruiser. About half an hour later though, this transforms from badass to just a pain in the, you get the point. Your shoulders, arms and lower back are always working to maintain this position, and the mid-mounted pegs will make a tall rider feel a little locked in as well. The good news is that Harley riding positions are almost infinitely tweakable, and you could swap the bar, pegs and even the seat out for a range of accessory units that will help you find something more agreeable. In case you're wondering why you should bother going through the effort, well, there is one very good reason that we haven't addressed so far. For those of you curious about the name, the S at the end stands for special, and whenever Harley gets the name special, that means you get a blacked out treatment and a bigger engine. While most motorcycles in the Softail family run the 107 Milwaukee 8 engine, a few models get the bigger 114 engine. What that means in the metric system is that you're getting a larger 1868cc V-twin, which is about 110cc more than the motor in the standard lowrider. Torque goes up by 12 Nm, which takes the total to 161 Nm, all of which is available at just 3000 rpm. With such a massive capacity and no interest whatsoever in crossing the 5000 rpm mark, this motor is a titan of torque. The throttle response is smooth, but you have to be very careful with your inputs at low speeds because this hog is always ready to leap. I'm a fan of the Milwaukee 8 series of engines, and this one is just as likable. Nasty vibrations are a thing of the past, but that old school Harley rumble and roar is still intact, and the bike surges up to 140 kph with absolute ease. With so much shove on offer, it's a good thing that the chassis can match, and the Lowrider S feels stable in every situation. Although that is something you'd expect from a machine that weighs 308 kgs fully fueled. Over California's patchy canyon roads, the suspension's firm setup was apparent, and the Lowrider S doesn't mind a bit of playing around. The braking setup is powerful enough, but without bordering into sport bike space, and the Michelin Scorcher tires perform in a similar fashion. But as with pretty much every large Harley-Davidson, the fun slams to a premature end when the foot pegs grind down. With just 30 degrees of cornering clearance at either side, you could scrape these pegs at city speeds without much effort. Keeping with Harley's sense of old-school motorcycling, the only electronic assist you will find is a dual-channel ABS setup. In that sense, the Lowrider S's engine and chassis combine forces to offer a riding experience that's very particular to a Harley-Davidson, but good fun all the way through. If that's something that sounds interesting to you, you'll be happy to know that the wait isn't going to be very long before this bike arrives in our market. The Lowrider S is going to launch in India in just a few months' time, and when it does, it'll be the most affordable Harley with that 114 engine. Whether this is going to be the best motorcycle in the Softail lineup, well, that's an answer our wonderful roads will just be itching to provide.
And now it's time for tips on sustainability and protecting the environment with Servo Futura G Plus from Indian Oil. Turn your engine off at traffic lights or when the car's stopped. Make sure your car's filters are clean.